Hello and welcome back to part 3 of this video series. In this video we're going to be looking at how we can add sculpting damage to our object, as well as how we can optimize it so it's ready for in-game use. Basically, what happens is we make something called a low poly mesh, which is like the game ready asset, so the one will actually go into your game. And then we make another mesh called the high poly mesh. So the high poly mesh is going to be hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of polygons. So I know we've got things like nanite, etc. But I think it's still important to kind of abide by traditional rules in a sense. So like having a coin that's like 500,000 polygons is just ridiculous. And there's no need for you to actually do it. So what we want to do, we want to take the object that we just selected and we want to jump into object mode. Let's delete my annotations. And if I press Control C, Control V, while I've got my object selected, it's going to duplicate it. So the really important bit is we do not move the object. So for the high poly, low poly bacon to work, they need to be in the exact same 3D space. So I might actually get to a point where we don't actually need that low poly and we make a new low poly depending on how much damage we actually do. But for the most part, it stays where it is, because we'll do something called caging, which I'll go over in a little bit. Right, so what we want to do, we want to basically, before we start, it doesn't matter what way around you name them, but one of them we're just going to call low poly. So just click on the actual text in the top right and press enter, and the other one's going to be called high poly. And I'm just going to hide, so press a little eyeball on the low poly, just so it disappears. So the high poly mesh, I want to go back into my modifiers, and I want to press the X, because I don't want to be using subdivision surface. I want to be using another modifier, which is called multi-resolution, which essentially does the same thing, but if we're sculpting, it means I can use various levels of detail. So I click on my high poly, I press a little X to remove the subdivision surface. Then I add a modifier called multi-resolution. So if we look at the references, we can see the corners are quite dinked out. So they're all different. Their ones are very similar. There we go. So they've got little dink outs on them, like where they're being smashed, dropped, etc., clanked against other coins. So the way that we replicate this, if I press subdivide, each time I subdivide, it's going up a level. So if I turn on wireframe and go into sculpt mode, so you can just see it actually happening. So this is the one that we have done. Level 1 has slightly more polygons, level 2 has slightly more, level 3 slightly more, level 4 slightly more. So depending on how high spec your PC is, obviously you'll be able to get away with going up higher. So my computer is okay, so I'll go to like 5. 5 is an okay level for me. Wireframe. There we go. So if you press 5 on your keyboard, or you can go to the sculpting workspace at the top. So at the top you've got all the different workspaces you can work in. You can just click on sculpting. And this will bring you into sculpting view. So basically what we want to do to get this effect on the corners is pretty simple. So on the left hand side we have all the different brushes that we can use. At the top we've got the radius of our brush, so how big it is. We've got the strength of our brush, so how much of an impact it actually makes. And we've also got tools to actually cut in, smooth, etc. So I'm on the draw brush by default. If I was to just click and drag, it's going to add geometry. If I hold Alt, it's going to rotate my camera, so same as the 3D view. If I hold Control, it's going to take clay away, so it's going to cut in. And if I hold Shift and paint over, it's going to smooth the mesh. So the brush that we want to use is the one that is called Scrape. So there's a slight technique to using this, but nothing too extreme. So if I click and drag on this corner, we can see that it's giving us the effect of our reference image, where it's kind of breaking it down. Just gonna go up one more level to 6, just so it's a little bit nicer. So the process is basically we want to do scrapes. We want to do like a series of mini scrapes. So if I click and drag a little bit, and then if I come to the side, I might click and drag again, and then it's just a case of me keep doing loads of tiny little scrapes each time. So it might be, okay, I want to do this bit. If I rotate my camera a little bit, I'll do a tiny little scrape on this side. And you can see I'm starting to get like different faces form on each side, just to kind of add to that breakup. So I got one here, I got one here, got another one here, and we're literally just going around our mesh and we're just repeating them steps. So I go on to scrape, click and drag. I can go a bit bigger if I want to. I let go of my mouse, click and drag again, let go of my mouse, click and drag, and I'm just kind of building up them shapes. I'm just going to work my way around, repeating the same steps over and over again. So click and drag, come off, click and drag, click and drag, like so. Just trying to break the shape up a little bit, just so, again, we're trying to get variation as opposed to it being so perfect. And also feel free to play around with the size of your brush to do like smaller scrapes, etc. Yeah, so just trying to break it up even more so than we already had by adding that randomness. Round. So you can do some massive scrapes if you really want. If you really want to get like mega randomness. But again, it's all about experimenting. If you don't like it, just press Ctrl Z, go back. For the most part, it's just repeating the exact same steps over and over again. So click, come off, click, come off. If you feel like you're not getting enough detail, you just go up subdivision levels. So you press subdivide again. And you might also find that when you rotate it, it shows like a really low quality mesh. It's just an optimization thing of Blender. Try not to crash your machine each time you're pivoting, so to speak. So just working around, and then once you're done, we need to do the inside as well. So pretty much the same edges, just the inside ones instead. So from a logical sense, the inside ones are less likely to be as damaged. So it's just a case of adding a bit of variation to them, but there wouldn't be as much as like full damage and things, because where it's extruded in, there is more protection for it. So I'll just do this last bit quite sloppy, just so I can get round to the inside. Normally I'd use a graphist tablet, but a bit of pressure sensitivity helps. Cut it off. Cut it off. I personally think that I messed up that edge, but that's fine. We all make mistakes, and then I'm just going to repeat on the inside. So you're going to have issues on the inside when you get to the corners, so just try and stray away from them. And the reason is because it's like an inside pinch, so you can probably use multi-plane scrape, but no, that looks disgusting, so I won't do that either. So on the inside, just try and stick to the long edges, as long as there's a bit of variation to it, it'll look fine. because we want to kind of avoid that pinching that it's offering. So there's just one way to sculpt. There's loads of other techniques that you can kind of do as well. But I feel like this is the quickest for what we are trying to achieve. Mine looks a bit like concrete. That's okay. A bit too extreme with my damage. Lovely. So once you've done the process of kind of working around, I think the only edge that's let me down is this one here, which is quite big. So if I want to trim it down a little bit, I can use the same brush, just like a bigger brush stroke across it. So make my brush slightly bigger, just do like big strokes back and forth, and it'll just trim off some of that detail. So before it looked like this, like a massive dent, and afterwards it's like this, so a lot more subtle. And it's just a case of touching up next to it again. That feel. Probably cut too much off, but that's fine. It's fine. So once we've done that, we've got our high poly mesh. So we've got our coin, which is sculpted, looks okay. Obviously, once we add materials and start kind of layering up materials on top of each other, it's going to look a lot nicer. So the issue that we now have, our high poly and our low poly. So I'm just going to jump back to layout if you change the sculpting, and I'm just going to go into object mode. So pressing 4. We need our high poly and our low poly to be the same dimensions. So our low poly needs to match this shape here, basically. So if I unhide my low poly, we can see that there's loads of it that's poking out. Because I've smoothed them edges off, my low poly is pretty much redundant right now. So all I'm going to do, I am going to change my low poly to be like base coin, just in case I need it later at some point. Or if I want to make like variations of coins, I can duplicate that object a few times and do a couple of different variations. I'm going to take my high poly coin, this one here, and I am going to duplicate it or copy and paste it. So Control C, Control V. It doesn't matter what one you name low poly out of them two, and I'm just going to rename it to low poly. So now I've got my one I'm actually going to use for my high poly, which is the one called high poly, and I've got the one that's called low poly. So the high poly one, we want to hide that. So the one that is named high poly, and if we unhide the low poly one, we want to set the local viewport to be 1. So each time I go down, we can see that we're losing some of that sculpting detail. But the good thing now, the proportions are exactly the same. So if I was to go into sculpt mode again, just so we can see, and turn on wireframe. So this is my high poly, this one here, and we can see there's a lot of edges. And if I go on my low poly, we can see there's a lot less edges. But the actual overall shape is the same. So when we do our bake, we're going to get a really clean bake. So that base coin, when we do baking, I'll show you on both of them, so you can see the issues that occur when the cage is wrong and the issue that occur when you actually fix it correctly. So with the low poly, I've changed the level viewport to 1, and I'm just going to press the drop down and press apply. So this currently is 2,500 faces. If you can't see this, you just need to right click at the bottom and turn on scene statistics, and you'll be able to see. I don't need my reference for the time being, so I'm gonna send that behind. So for a coin that's going to be so small in your game anyway, there's a lot of geometry on it. So we need to do something called optimizing, which is basically the process of deleting faces that we don't need. So faces that aren't contributing to the overall shape of your model. So for example, all of them reinforcing edges that we added earlier, they're not actually doing anything right now. They were just there for our high poly to smooth correctly. So this step is long-winded, not overly long-winded, but it's really easy to do. So on my low poly, I'm just going to jump into edit mode, and I'm just going to double click on an edge that is flowing all the way around. So an edge that I don't want. I'm just going to press delete on my keyboard and dissolve edges. So dissolve edges is going to try and retain the original shape, but it's just going to remove the edge that I selected. If I do delete edges, we can see that it deletes the faces that are attached to it. So delete, dissolve edges. And I'm just trying to find edges that are not actually having an impact on the shape itself. So most of these pretty much can go on that top bit. This one is serving absolute no purpose because my shape is not going like this. It's on a flat surface. So if it's not contributing to the overall silhouette of your model, dissolve it. So these inside bits, I double click, dissolve, 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 dissolve. So these bits here, I will keep the middle edge only because there's a tiny bit of bowing. Like we see it kind of bows out a tiny bit, which isn't going to be overly noticeable, but it's better to have a little bit more than not enough. And I'm just going to try and keep these ones here for the kind of curvature, so that the actual bevel of that edge. This one, having no impact, I remove it. This middle one has some impact, so I'll keep that one. This one here is serving no purpose. This massive one here, this big circle, I'm just going to hold shift while I select it all. And just work my way around while holding shift. It was actually a much quicker way of doing that, but I am too committed, so I'll keep doing this. So I just want to make sure I've got all of them highlighted. And with these, again, I just want to dissolve it, so it all goes to 1 point. So the top is pretty much done, and it's just a case of repeating the exact same process on the bottom. So the ones that are not contributing, we're just going to dissolve. So in edge mode, click on the one I don't want, delete on the keyboard, dissolve, 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 dissolve. If you're looking at screens like, I'm thinking, how is he dissolving so fast? Basically, if I do a tool, if I want to do the same tool again, I can press G on my keyboard and it will redo whatever tool I used last. The only reason I didn't tell you that originally is because if you do undo and then you press G again, it will keep undoing. So you just end up messing your model up for very little reward. I'll get on. And this big one here, I'll get rid of. So I now show you the other way on how we could have removed that middle one. So if I go into vertex mode and click on that middle vertex and press the up arrow on my keyboard, it will grow my selection. Then I can just press tab, type in collapse, and it'll go to 1 point. Like so. So just by doing that, before we were at 2,500 faces, we're now at 1,155. So we could go even lower and start deleting these edges that are kind of going through the middle, if we wanted to. So I could select all the ones that are kind of in the middle of our original reinforcing lines and dissolve them. So now we're at 590 polygons. So each time we're getting rid of stuff, we're lowering that poly count, we're optimizing our model even more each time. I think the important ones to keep are these ones on the outside because they're determining the actual shape that we are sculpted in. So I think for the most part they are okay. I'll probably get rid of that one as well. So now we're at 580, 850, 850 polygons. So once we're done, we've got our low poly. You could delete a fair bit more. So for example, them big ones that are running around the top, I could get rid of them. As long as the overall silhouette is similar to our high poly. So if I unhide it, it hasn't got a match exactly, but it will be good. It will be fine when it comes to actually baking the actual mesh itself. Okay, so let's cover what we've done so far. So in this video, we use sculpting brushes to help us add more wear and tear and storytelling to our asset. We also looked at how we can turn our high poly mesh into a low poly mesh. We use dissolve edges to help us optimize this further. In the next video, we're going to look at UV unwrapping so we can start generating our texture maps for later videos. Thanks for watching. If you want access to this series before anyone else, as well as project files, polls, and creator challenges, please check out our Patreon. Thank you to our subscribers. We'll see you next time.